Call me immediately. It's about Adrian. 6 words. That's all it took to shatter my world into 1,000 pieces I'd never be able to put back together the same way again. I stared at the email on my phone screen, my coffee growing cold in my trembling hands. No greeting. No signature. Just 6 words that felt like a punch to the gut from my lawyer. A man who usually cushioned bad news with careful phrases and gentle warnings. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed his number. 3 rings. 4. Then his voice, tight with something I'd never heard before. Corinne, you need to sit down. I was already sitting, but I gripped the kitchen chair anyway, knuckles white against the worn wood. What's happened to Adrian? Is he hurt? Is he? He's not hurt. But you need to come to my office. Now. The drive felt like swimming through thick honey. Every red light stretched forever. Every turn brought a new wave of panic crashing over me. My only son, my brilliant, charming Adrian who called me every Sunday, who still brought me flowers on Mother's Day, what could he have done? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. The law office smelled like old leather and broken dreams. Mr. Calloway's usually steady hands were shaking as he opened a thick manila folder across from me. His fountain pen clicked nervously against the desk. Click, click, click. Like a countdown to something terrible. Corinne, I need you to look at these documents very carefully. He slid the first paper across the mahogany surface. My name was there at the bottom, written in blue ink. But something felt wrong. The signature looked like mine, but it felt foreign, like seeing your face in a funhouse mirror. This is a property transfer deed for your rental house on Maple Street, he said quietly. Signed by you. Dated 3 months ago. My mouth went dry. I never signed anything like that. He slid another paper across. Then another. Bank transfer authorizations. Investment account closures. Power of attorney documents. All bearing my name, my supposed signature, my apparent consent to hand over everything I'd spent 67 years building. According to these documents, you've transferred ownership of your rental property, liquidated your retirement savings, and granted full financial power of attorney to. His voice cracked like thin ice. To Adrian. The room spun. The walls closed in. My chest felt like someone had wrapped steel bands around my lungs and pulled them tight. That's impossible. I would never, I couldn't have. But even as the words left my mouth, a horrible truth began creeping in like cold fog. The dates on the papers. March 4th, 2021. I remembered that week. I remembered it clearly because I'd spent it in the hospital, tubes taped to my chest after my heart attack scare, fighting to breathe while machines beeped their mechanical lullabies. I was unconscious when these papers were supposedly signed. Mr. Calloway's pen clicked faster now. Corinne, I've been your lawyer for 15 years. I know your signature. I know your handwriting. And this. He tapped the papers with one trembling finger. This isn't yours. The words hit me like a physical blow. My son, my baby boy who I'd rocked to sleep through countless nights, who I'd cheered for at every baseball game, who I'd scraped together college tuition for by working double shifts, had stolen my signature. Stolen my identity. Stolen my life. But how is this legal? I whispered. How can he just take everything? Because on paper, you gave it to him willingly. Mr. Calloway's voice was barely above a whisper. And in the eyes of the law, these documents are perfectly valid until we can prove otherwise. The office walls felt like they were closing in. 37 years of marriage to a man who died too young. 23 years of raising Adrian alone. Decades of 60-hour work weeks, skipped meals, and worn-out shoes so my son could have everything he needed. All of it gone. Erased with forged signatures and fake dates. But something burned in my chest alongside the heartbreak. Something fierce and hot and unbreakable. Can we fight this? I asked. Mr. Calloway looked up from the papers, and for the first time that day, I saw a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. We're going to try. But Corinne. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What I'm about to tell you next about what Adrian has been doing, it's going to make everything you've heard today look like child's play. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive or fight back? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to hear the rest of this unbelievable story, because what happened next will shock you to your core. The house felt like a tomb when I walked through the front door. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, the refrigerator's hum, the drip from the kitchen faucet I kept meaning to fix, the tick of the wall clock that suddenly felt like a countdown to nothing. I stood in my own kitchen, surrounded by 40 years of memories, and felt like a stranger. My hands shook as I set my purse on the counter. The same counter where Adrian used to do his homework while I cooked dinner. Where he'd sit on the stool, legs swinging, telling me about his day at school with chocolate milk mustache on his upper lip. I touched the edge of the wooden table, scarred from years of use, marked with the ring stains of countless coffee cups. This was where I used to braid Adrian's hair when he was 7, back when he'd sit still long enough to let me weave the dark strands between my fingers. He'd squirm and giggle, shaking his head free the moment I finished, racing outside barefoot to climb trees and chase fireflies. Back then, I believed love could anchor a child to truth. I believed that all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights when he had fever, all the extra shifts I worked to buy him new sneakers, I believed it all meant something. That it built something unbreakable between us. But love hadn't been enough. The silence pressed against my eardrums. I walked to the living room, past the framed photos on the mantel. Adrian's graduation from high school. Adrian's first job promotion. Adrian at Christmas last year, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera. How long had he been planning this? How many Sunday dinners had he sat at my table, carving roast beef and asking about my doctor appointments, all while plotting to steal everything from under me? I sank into my recliner, the one piece of furniture that still felt like mine, and closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I started to drift off, I'd see those forged signatures floating behind my eyelids like ghosts. The next morning, I found an envelope wedged under my front door. My name was typed across the front in business letters. No return address, no postmark. Inside were bank notices. Not the usual late payment warnings I'd seen before, but something far worse. Transfer confirmations. Account closures. Documents with official letterheads and my name typed at the bottom. But I'd never signed these papers. Never even seen them before this moment. My coffee grew cold as I spread them across the kitchen table. Each page was another nail in the coffin of my financial life. Savings account, closed. Certificate of deposit, liquidated. Even my small checking account, the one with barely $300 that I used for groceries, had been emptied. At the bottom of the stack, one document made my blood freeze. A power of attorney form with my signature. Only it wasn't my signature. The letters were too careful, too deliberate. My real signature had a little flourish on the C in Corinne, a habit from my school days when I thought it made me look sophisticated. This signature was flat, lifeless. Fake. I grabbed my reading glasses and studied it closer. The ink looked different too, darker, fresher somehow. Like someone had practiced writing my name over and over until they got it good enough to fool a notary. My son had been in my house. Going through my papers. Studying my handwriting like a criminal casing a bank. The phone rang, making me jump. Adrian's name flashed on the caller ID. I stared at it for 4 rings before my finger hovered over the answer button. What would I say? What could I say to the child I'd given everything to, who had taken everything from me? I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? Love you. Love you." The words felt like acid on my screen. I set the phone face down and walked back to the table full of forged papers. At the bottom of the stack, one document caught my eye that I'd missed before. Another notarized affidavit, dated just 2 weeks ago. But this one was different. This one wasn't just about money. This one was about my house. The house I'd lived in for 37 years. The house where I'd brought Adrian home from the hospital as a newborn. The house where I'd nursed my dying husband through his final weeks. The house that held every memory I had left of the life I'd built. According to this paper with my forged signature, I had decided to transfer the deed to Adrian for estate planning purposes. I was still living in it, but it wasn't mine anymore. My legs gave out. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the fake document trembling in my hands. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my home. My sanctuary. The one place in the world that was supposed to be safe. But as I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of my son's betrayal, something else caught my attention. Something that made my heart stop completely. At the bottom of that last document, there was a small notation I'd almost missed. A tiny pencil mark in the corner that looked like someone's initials. But they weren't Adrian's initials. Someone else had helped him do this to me. Someone else was in on the plan to erase me from my own life. And suddenly, I realized this betrayal went much deeper than I'd ever imagined. I spent the next 3 days like a ghost in my own house. Crackers became my only food because nothing else would stay down. I moved from the couch to my bedroom and back again, clutching those fake documents like evidence of my own disappearance. Grief has a way of paralyzing you first, before it sharpens you into something harder. By the 4th day, anger started cutting through the fog. I pulled every drawer from every dresser. Emptied every closet. Turned my house upside down looking for answers. If Adrian had been planning this for months, maybe years, there had to be more evidence. More lies. More proof of what he'd been doing behind my back. I found it at the bottom of an old shoebox in the hall closet, buried under expired grocery coupons and forgotten birthday cards. A notarized affidavit with my name typed at the top. The paper was crisp, official-looking, with a raised seal that caught the light. But when I looked closer, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. The signature wasn't mine. It was shaped like my name, sure. Someone had tried to copy the loops and curves they'd seen on Christmas cards or birthday checks. But it was wrong. All wrong. The pressure was uneven, like someone holding their breath while they wrote. The angle was off. And that little flourish I always did on the C, it was there but backward, like someone had been looking at it in a mirror. This wasn't my handwriting. This was someone pretending to be me. My hands shook as I held the paper up to the light. The date made my stomach lurch. March 6, 2021. 2 days after my heart attack. 2 days after they'd rushed me to the hospital with chest pains so severe I thought I was dying. I remembered that week in painful detail. The cardiac unit with its beeping machines and antiseptic smell. The tubes taped to my chest. The fear in the nurse's eyes when my heart rhythm went crazy on the monitors. I'd been unconscious for most of those 3 days, drifting in and out on morphine and prayer. Someone had forged my signature while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of everything, the fake signature, the impossible date, the notary stamp that somehow made lies look legal. My fingers flew across the screen as I typed an email to Mr. Calloway, "We need to meet again. I found something." His response came back in minutes, "Come in immediately." But as I gathered up the papers to leave, something else caught my eye. A small detail I'd missed in all my rage and heartbreak. The notary's signature at the bottom. I recognized that name. Margaret Chun. She lived 3 blocks away, worked at the bank where I'd had my accounts for 20 years. Margaret, who always asked about Adrian when I came in to deposit checks. Margaret, who'd watched him grow up from a gap-toothed kid to a successful adult. Margaret had notarized a document while I was unconscious in the hospital. Either she was in on Adrian's plan, or someone had fooled her too. But which was it? Had my sweet neighborhood notary betrayed me, or had my son become so good at lies that he could fool even the people who were supposed to verify the truth? I drove to Mr. Calloway's office with white knuckles and a racing heart. The forged affidavit sat in my purse like a loaded gun, ready to blow up whatever was left of my old life. He was waiting for me in the lobby, and one look at his face told me he'd been expecting this call. "How bad is it?" he asked before I'd even sat down. I pulled out the fake document and watched his expression change as he studied it through his reading glasses. His fountain pen stopped its nervous clicking for the first time since this nightmare began. "This is definitive," he said quietly. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore, Corinne. This is fraud. Identity theft. Forgery. This could put Adrian in prison." The words should have felt like victory, but instead they felt like another kind of death. Prison. My son, in an orange jumpsuit, behind bars because of papers I'd found hidden in my closet. "What do we do now?" I whispered. Mr. Calloway reached for his phone, but before he could dial, it rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned. "It's Margaret Chun," he said, looking puzzled. "The notary whose stamp is on your document." My heart stopped. "She's asking to meet with both of us. Says she has something to tell us about Adrian's visits to her office." Visits. Plural. I stared at the forged signature on the paper in my lap, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't just one fake document. This wasn't just one lie. Adrian hadn't just betrayed me once. He'd been doing it over and over and over again, building a tower of forged papers and stolen signatures that reached back months, maybe years. And now the notary who'd helped him, willingly or unwillingly, was ready to talk. But was she calling to confess, or to warn us that the conspiracy went even deeper than we'd imagined? Margaret Chun looked nothing like a criminal when she walked into Mr. Calloway's office. She was a small woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a cardigan that looked like something a kindergarten teacher would choose. Her hands shook as she set her purse on the table, and when she looked at me, her eyes were red-rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying secrets too heavy to bear alone. "I'm so sorry, Corinne," were the first words out of her mouth. "I never meant for this to happen." Mr. Calloway gestured for her to sit, his lawyer instincts already sharpening like a blade. "Margaret, before you say anything else, I need to ask, do you need your own attorney present?" She shook her head quickly. "No. I need to tell the truth. I should have told it months ago." I leaned forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What truth?" Margaret's fingers twisted together in her lap. "Adrian came to my office 7 times in the past year. 7 different appointments, always with documents that needed notarizing. Always with your signature already on them. 7 times. The number hit me like a physical blow. Not one mistake, not one moment of weakness or desperation. 7 calculated visits. 7 opportunities for someone, anyone, to question what was happening. "I should have known," Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The signatures never looked quite right. Too careful, too perfect. Real signatures have little mistakes, little variations. These were like someone had practiced them." "Then why didn't you stop it?" The words came out harsher than I intended, But I couldn't hold back the anger anymore. Margaret's face crumpled. Because Adrian was so convincing. He said you were having memory problems, that you'd signed the papers but couldn't remember doing it. He said your doctor was worried about early dementia, and that's why you'd given him power of attorney, to help manage your affairs before you forgot how. Dementia. My son had told people I was losing my mind. That I couldn't be trusted to remember my own signature, my own decisions. He'd made me into a tragic figure, the confused old woman who needed her devoted son to take care of everything. It was the perfect lie. Who would question a son trying to help his aging mother? Who would suspect fraud when the story was so reasonable, so heartbreaking, so believable? He brought medical forms, Margaret continued, pulling papers from her purse with trembling fingers. Documents that looked official, with doctor letterheads. They said you'd been diagnosed with cognitive decline, that you needed assistance with financial decisions. She slid the papers across the table. Even upside down, I could see they were fake. The letterhead was from Dr. Morrison's office, my family doctor for 15 years, but the text was wrong. The font didn't match. The signature was a poor imitation of Dr. Morrison's usual scroll. But you've been my notary for years, I said, my voice breaking. You know I'm not sick. You know I'm not confused. I know that now, Margaret whispered. But Adrian said you were good at hiding it. That people with early dementia often seem normal in short interactions, especially when they're trying to cover up their condition. He said you'd be embarrassed if anyone knew, so I should just handle the paperwork quietly. Mr. Calloway was taking notes, his fountain pen scratching across legal paper. Margaret, I need to ask you something very important. Did Adrian ever threaten you? Did he ever suggest there would be consequences if you didn't help him? She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Not directly. But after the fourth visit, I started having doubts. I called your house, Corinne, to ask how you were feeling. To check on you myself. My stomach dropped. I never got a call from you. Because Adrian answered. He said you were napping, that the medication made you sleep a lot. But then he said something that scared me. Margaret's hands were shaking harder now. He said it was important that we keep everything professional and confidential. That if word got out about your condition, it could complicate your medical care. That some people might try to take advantage of the situation if they knew you were vulnerable. The genius of it was breathtaking and horrifying. Adrian had turned my own protector against me. He'd made Margaret believe that helping him was helping me. That questioning him would hurt me. He made me feel like I was part of a conspiracy to protect you, Margaret said, tears finally spilling over. Instead of realizing I was part of a conspiracy to destroy you. Mr. Calloway set down his pen and looked at both of us with the expression of a man who'd seen too many ugly truths in his long career. Margaret, are you willing to testify to all of this? Are you willing to help us prove what really happened? She nodded without hesitation. Yes. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But as she reached into her purse for tissues, I caught sight of something else inside, another document, partially hidden beneath her wallet. Margaret, I said slowly, is there something else you need to tell us? Her face went pale. She looked at Mr. Calloway, then back at me, and I could see her weighing her options. Whatever else she knew, it was bigger than forged signatures and fake medical reports. There's one more thing, she whispered. Something I found out last week that made me realize how much deeper this goes. She pulled out the hidden document with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold the paper steady. Adrian didn't just use me as his notary, she said. He's been using my seal on documents all over the state. Documents for other people's parents. Other elderly clients who supposedly have dementia, who supposedly need their children to handle their affairs. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about me. Adrian hadn't just destroyed his own mother, he'd made it into a business. How many other families had he torn apart? How many other elderly people were sitting in empty houses right now, wondering how their own children could have betrayed them so completely? But as Margaret unfolded the document in her trembling hands, I realized we were about to discover something even worse than a pattern of fraud. We were about to learn the true scope of my son's empire of lies. The house felt like a tomb when I walked through the front door. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence: the refrigerator's hum, the drip from the kitchen faucet I kept meaning to fix, the tick of the wall clock that suddenly felt like a countdown to nothing. I stood in my own kitchen, surrounded by 40 years of memories, and felt like a stranger. My hands shook as I set my purse on the counter. The same counter where Adrian used to do his homework while I cooked dinner. Where he'd sit on the stool, legs swinging, telling me about his day at school with chocolate milk mustache on his upper lip. I touched the edge of the wooden table, scarred from years of use, marked with the ring stains of countless coffee cups. This was where I used to braid Adrian's hair when he was 7, back when he'd sit still long enough to let me weave the dark strands between my fingers. He'd squirm and giggle, shaking his head free the moment I finished, racing outside barefoot to climb trees and chase fireflies. Back then, I believed love could anchor a child to truth. I believed that all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights when he had fever, all the extra shifts I worked to buy him new sneakers, I believed it all meant something. That it built something unbreakable between us. But love hadn't been enough. The silence pressed against my eardrums. I walked to the living room, past the framed photos on the mantel. Adrian's graduation from high school. Adrian's first job promotion. Adrian at Christmas last year, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera. How long had he been planning this? How many Sunday dinners had he sat at my table, carving roast beef and asking about my doctor appointments, all while plotting to steal everything from under me? I sank into my recliner, the one piece of furniture that still felt like mine, and closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I started to drift off, I'd see those forged signatures floating behind my eyelids like ghosts. The next morning, I found an envelope wedged under my front door. My name was typed across the front in business letters. No return address, no postmark. Inside were bank notices. Not the usual late payment warnings I'd seen before, but something far worse. Transfer confirmations. Account closures. Documents with official letterheads and my name typed at the bottom. But I'd never signed these papers. Never even seen them before this moment. My coffee grew cold as I spread them across the kitchen table. Each page was another nail in the coffin of my financial life. Savings account, closed. Certificate of deposit, liquidated. Even my small checking account, the one with barely $300 that I used for groceries, had been emptied. At the bottom of the stack, one document made my blood freeze. A power of attorney form with my signature. Only it wasn't my signature. The letters were too careful, too deliberate. My real signature had a little flourish on the C in Corinne, a habit from my school days when I thought it made me look sophisticated. This signature was flat, lifeless. Fake. I grabbed my reading glasses and studied it closer. The ink looked different too, darker, fresher somehow. Like someone had practiced writing my name over and over until they got it good enough to fool a notary. My son had been in my house, going through my papers, studying my handwriting like a criminal casing a bank. The phone rang, making me jump. Adrian's name flashed on the caller ID. I stared at it for 4 rings before my finger hovered over the answer button. What would I say? What could I say to the child I'd given everything to, who had taken everything from me? I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text. Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? Love you. Love you. The words felt like acid on my screen. I set the phone face down and walked back to the table full of forged papers. At the bottom of the stack, one document caught my eye that I'd missed before. Another notarized affidavit, dated just 2 weeks ago. But this one was different. This one wasn't just about money. This one was about my house. The house I'd lived in for 37 years. The house where I'd brought Adrian home from the hospital as a newborn. The house where I'd nursed my dying husband through his final weeks. The house that held every memory I had left of the life I'd built. According to this paper with my forged signature, I had decided to transfer the deed to Adrian for estate planning purposes. I was still living in it, but it wasn't mine anymore. My legs gave out. I sat down hard in the kitchen chair, the fake document trembling in my hands. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd stolen my home. My sanctuary. The one place in the world that was supposed to be safe. But as I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of my son's betrayal, something else caught my attention. Something that made my heart stop completely. At the bottom of that last document, there was a small notation I'd almost missed. A tiny pencil mark in the corner that looked like someone's initials. But they weren't Adrian's initials. Someone else had helped him do this to me. Someone else was in on the plan to erase me from my own life. And suddenly, I realized this betrayal went much deeper than I'd ever imagined. I didn't sleep for 3 days after we found Adrian's ledger. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that deadline next to my name. 3 weeks. 21 days before my son finished whatever twisted plan would erase me from my own life forever. The walls of my house felt like they were closing in, but I couldn't leave. Where would I go? According to the papers Adrian had forged, this wasn't even my house anymore. Mr. Calloway worked around the clock, his law office becoming a war room filled with photocopied documents and legal briefs. Margaret had turned over every record from her notary files, building a mountain of evidence that painted Adrian as the mastermind of a criminal empire targeting elderly parents across 3 counties. But evidence and legal action take time. And time was the one thing I didn't have. That's when Mr. Calloway introduced me to someone who would change everything. Her name is Imani Washington, he said, leading me into a small conference room where a woman in her 30s sat surrounded by magnifying glasses, computer screens, and what looked like scientific equipment. She's a forensic document examiner. If anyone can prove those signatures are fake, it's her. Imani looked up from a microscope and smiled. Her hands were steady, her voice calm. Everything about her radiated the kind of confidence I desperately needed to feel. "I've been studying the documents your lawyer sent over," she said, gesturing to the papers spread across her table. "And I have good news. Your son may be a skilled manipulator, but he's a terrible forger." She pulled up a digital image on her computer screen. My real signature next to one of Adrian's fakes, magnified until every pen stroke looked like a highway. "See these pressure patterns?" She pointed to subtle variations in the ink thickness. "When you sign naturally, your hand moves in fluid motions. There are micropauses, slight tremors, natural variations in pressure. But when someone is copying a signature, they go slower, more deliberately. The pressure is too even, too controlled." The fake signature looked perfect to my untrained eye, but under Imani's expert analysis, it screamed deception. "That's not all," she continued, pulling up another screen. "I ran analysis on the digital documents from Adrian's computer, the ones we recovered from Margaret's files. Look at this metadata." Numbers and timestamps filled the screen, looking like code from a spy movie. But Imani translated them into English that cut through me like a blade. "This document claims to be signed by you on March 6 at 2:15 p.m. But the file creation data shows it was actually generated on Adrian's laptop at 11:47 p.m. that same night." He created the document almost 10 hours after you supposedly signed it. 10 hours after I was unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for my life while machines monitored my heartbeat. "We've got him," Mr. Calloway said, but his voice was tense rather than triumphant. "The question is whether we can build a case fast enough." Imani leaned back in her chair, studying me with eyes that seemed to see everything. "There's something else. Something that might help us move faster than traditional legal channels." She pulled out a folder I hadn't seen before, thick with documents that weren't mine. "I've been tracking Adrian's pattern for the past week, cross-referencing the names from his ledger with public records. He's not just stealing from his victims, he's been systematically transferring their assets to shell companies, offshore accounts, and investment funds that disappear money faster than the legal system can freeze them." My stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" "It means waiting for a court date might be too late. By the time we get in front of a judge, every penny might be gone forever, laundered through so many fake companies that we'll never trace it back." The room fell silent except for the hum of Imani's computers. 3 weeks had suddenly become 3 days, maybe less. But then Imani smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd been hoping for exactly this kind of challenge. "Lucky for us, Adrian made one crucial mistake in all his planning," she said. "He assumed no one would fight back. He assumed his victims would be too confused, too ashamed, or too scared to expose him." She looked directly at me, her eyes blazing with determination. "He didn't count on his mother being a fighter." Mr. Calloway's phone buzzed with an urgent text. He glanced at it and went pale. "What is it?" I asked. "Judge Morrison can see us tomorrow at 9 a.m. for an emergency hearing. We can file for an immediate asset freeze and restraining order against Adrian." Tomorrow. After weeks of feeling powerless, after days of discovering the scope of my son's betrayal, we finally had a chance to fight back. But as we gathered up the evidence, hundreds of pages of forged documents, fake medical reports, and Adrian's own handwritten confession in the form of his victim ledger, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope. Not the naive hope I'd carried as a mother, believing love could fix anything, but the fierce, determined hope of a woman who'd been pushed too far and was finally ready to push back. "There's one more thing," Imani said as we prepared to leave. "Tomorrow's hearing isn't just about freezing assets. If the judge believes our evidence, she can issue an emergency order protecting you from any attempts to have you declared incompetent." She pulled up one final document on her screen, a medical evaluation form with Dr. Hayes' letterhead. "Adrian scheduled your competency evaluation for next Thursday. He was planning to have you committed to Sunset Manor in 6 days." 6 days. I stared at the appointment slip, at my name typed next to Cognitive Assessment Urgent. In less than a week, my son had planned to have me locked away in a memory care facility, declared legally incompetent, with no way to tell anyone what he'd stolen from me. But now we knew. And tomorrow, we'd have our chance to stop him. The question was, would justice move fast enough to save not just my money, but my freedom itself? The courthouse steps felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. My legs shook as I walked through the metal detectors, carrying a binder thick with evidence that represented the destruction of everything I'd spent 67 years building. Mr. Calloway walked beside me, his fountain pen clicking nervously in his jacket pocket. The same nervous habit that had driven me crazy during our first meeting, but now sounded like a drumbeat marching me toward either salvation or complete defeat. Judge Morrison's courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and sickly. Adrian wasn't there yet. This was an ex parte hearing, which meant we got to present our evidence without him knowing what was happening. At least not until it was too late for him to run. "Your Honor," Mr. Calloway began, his voice steady despite the weight of what we were asking for, "we're requesting an emergency asset freeze and protection order for my client, Corinne Duval, who has been the victim of systematic financial fraud perpetrated by her own son. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 50s with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of family destruction imaginable. She flipped through our evidence in silence, page after page of forged signatures, fake medical reports, and Adrian's handwritten ledger that documented his crimes like a business plan. The minutes stretched like hours. Finally, she looked up. "Mr. Calloway, these allegations are serious. Identity theft, elder fraud, forgery. If proven, these charges could result in decades of federal prison time. Are you confident in your evidence?" "Completely confident, Your Honor. We have forensic handwriting analysis, digital metadata proving the documents were created after the alleged signing dates, and testimony from the notary who was deceived into legitimizing the fraudulent papers." Judge Morrison turned to me. "Mrs. Duval, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe your son poses an immediate threat to your financial security and personal freedom?" The words stuck in my throat. Even after everything, after the forged signatures, the stolen house, the planned institutionalization, some part of me still remembered braiding Adrian's hair at the kitchen table, still remembered the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers. But then I thought about Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Rodriguez and all the other names in Adrian's ledger. All the other families he'd destroyed with the same calculated cruelty he'd used on me. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "He's not just stealing my money. He's trying to erase my entire existence." Judge Morrison nodded grimly and reached for her stamp. "Until further notice, all assets connected to Corinne Duval are frozen pending investigation. Any attempts to transfer property, liquidate accounts, or initiate competency proceedings are hereby prohibited." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Frozen. The word felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. Not victory, not yet, but the first real protection I'd had since this nightmare began. Outside the courthouse, Mr. Calloway's phone was already ringing. Adrian's lawyer, no doubt, calling to demand explanations for why his client's financial empire had just been locked down by court order. "It's going to get ugly now," Mr. Calloway warned me. "Adrian will know we're fighting back. He'll try everything: denial, manipulation, maybe even threats. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the appointment slip for my competency evaluation, about the 6 days Adrian had given me before he planned to lock me away forever. "I'm ready," I said. But I wasn't ready for what happened 3 hours later. I was in my kitchen, making the first real meal I'd attempted in weeks, when my phone rang. Adrian's name flashed on the caller ID, and for a moment, I considered not answering. Then I realized, this might be my only chance to hear the truth directly from him. "Hello, Adrian." His voice was different. Colder. Like a mask had finally been ripped away. "You have no idea what you've just done, Mother." The word mother sounded like poison in his mouth. "I know exactly what I've done," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. "I've stopped you from stealing everything from me and destroying other families the way you destroyed ours." He laughed, a sound with no warmth, no recognition of the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise him. "You think this is over? You think one court order is going to save you? I've been planning this for 3 years. I know every legal loophole, every way around these temporary protections. And I know something you don't know." My blood went cold. "What?" "That competency evaluation you're so worried about? I didn't just schedule one assessment. I scheduled 3, with 3 different doctors, in 3 different counties. Even if you block one, the others will go forward. And I only need one doctor to sign off on your incompetency to have you committed." The phone felt slippery in my suddenly sweating hands. "But here's the beautiful part," Adrian continued. "Those other evaluations are scheduled under fake appointments, with fake names. You'll never find them to stop them. And by the time you figure out what's happening, you'll be locked in Sunset Manor with a legal declaration that everything you say is the delusion of a confused old woman. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen, clutching the phone, as the full scope of Adrian's backup plans crashed over me like a tsunami. He hadn't just been planning to steal from me. He'd been planning for every possible way I might fight back. And he was 3 steps ahead of every move we'd made. But as I stared out the window at the house I'd lived in for 37 years, at the life I'd built with love and sacrifice and hope, something new burned in my chest. Adrian had taught me to be underestimated. He'd trained every person in his life to see me as a confused old woman, a helpless victim who couldn't possibly fight back against his sophisticated schemes. That was going to be his biggest mistake. Because tomorrow, I wasn't going to fight Adrian in courtrooms or lawyers' offices where he held every advantage. Tomorrow, I was going to fight him in the one place he'd never expect, in front of everyone who'd been fooled by his lies. The Riverside Community Center had never felt so much like a battlefield. I sat in the back row of folding chairs, wearing my plainest dress, while Adrian stood at the podium in a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The annual charity dinner was in full swing. 200 people from our small town, all gathered to celebrate community heroes and generous donors. All gathered to celebrate my son, who'd bought his way onto the honor roll with money stolen from his own mother. Ladies and gentlemen, the event coordinator announced, we're honored to recognize Adrian Duval, whose generous donation of $50,000 will fund our new senior services program. $50,000. I knew exactly where that money had come from, my retirement savings, liquidated while I was unconscious in a cardiac unit. The audience erupted in applause. Adrian bowed slightly, his smile perfect, his hands clasped behind his back like a politician who'd never told a lie in his life. Several elderly people in the front rows beamed at him with the kind of gratitude reserved for true heroes. If only they knew. Mr. Calloway sat 3 rows ahead of me, a manila folder on his lap. Margaret Chun was near the side exit, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but determined. Imani had positioned herself near the stage, a laptop bag at her feet containing equipment that could project digital documents onto the large screen behind the podium. We'd planned this carefully. Adrian's public reputation was one of his strongest weapons. Who would believe that the town's generous benefactor was actually a criminal who'd built his wealth by destroying families? But that same public reputation could become his biggest weakness if we exposed the truth in front of everyone who'd been fooled by his lies. Adrian has also volunteered to sponsor our new program for elderly residents who need assistance with financial planning, the coordinator continued. His expertise in family financial management has already helped several local families navigate complex legal situations. Several local families. The names from his ledger. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, Dorothy Walsh. Their families sitting in this very room, probably grateful for Adrian's help with their elderly relatives' affairs. My son was being celebrated for perfecting the art of elder abuse. The coordinator handed Adrian the microphone. Adrian, would you like to say a few words about your commitment to helping our community's seniors? This was it. The moment Adrian would stand in front of 200 people and lie about his dedication to protecting elderly people like me. He cleared his throat, his voice carrying easily through the room's sound system. Thank you. When I look out at this community, I see the faces of people I've grown up with, people who've watched me become the man I am today. His eyes found mine in the back row, and for just a moment, his perfect smile faltered. My own mother taught me the importance of taking care of family, he continued, his voice gaining strength as he settled back into his performance. She showed me that sometimes the people we love need guidance, need someone to help them make difficult decisions when they can no longer make those decisions for themselves. The audience murmured approval. Several people nodded knowingly. Everyone had elderly relatives, Everyone understood the challenges of aging parents who might need help managing their affairs. That's why I'm so passionate about helping families navigate the complex legal and financial issues that come with caring for aging loved ones. Sometimes, his voice took on a note of practiced sadness. The hardest thing is accepting when someone you love can no longer handle their own affairs. But true love means making difficult decisions, even when those decisions are heartbreaking. He was describing me. Right there, in front of 200 people, he was painting me as the confused old woman who needed her devoted son to make her decisions for her. That's when Mr. Calloway stood up. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice cutting through Adrian's speech. "I think the community should see some documents before we celebrate too enthusiastically." The room fell silent. Adrian's smile froze on his face like ice. "I'm sorry," the coordinator said, looking flustered. "This isn't the time for." "Actually," Mr. Calloway continued, walking toward the stage, "this is exactly the time. Because the money Adrian donated tonight? It was stolen from his own mother through identity theft and forgery." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Adrian's face went white, but he held onto the microphone like a lifeline. "This is inappropriate," Adrian said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "This is a community celebration, not a legal proceeding." But Imani was already moving toward the projection screen, her laptop open, cables connecting to the display system. "You're right," she called out. "This isn't a legal proceeding. This is something better. It's the truth." The screen lit up behind Adrian with the first document. His handwritten ledger, magnified so everyone in the room could read the names, the dates, the dollar amounts. The evidence of a systematic fraud operation that had targeted dozens of families in their own community. The room erupted in shocked whispers as people recognized names on the list. Mrs. Patterson's daughter stood up in the front row, her face pale with realization. Mr. Rodriguez's nephew looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "That's not real," Adrian said into the microphone, but his voice cracked. "Those documents have been fabricated by a disturbed woman who—" The screen changed to show the forensic handwriting analysis. My real signature next to Adrian's forgeries, with Imani's expert commentary highlighting every telltale sign of fraud. Then came the metadata analysis, showing how documents had been created on Adrian's laptop hours after I'd supposedly signed them. Then the fake medical reports claiming I had dementia. Then the notary records showing 7 different fraudulent appointments. Document after document, piece after piece of evidence, projected onto the screen behind Adrian while he stood frozen at the podium, his perfect smile finally cracking completely. The applause had died. The whispers had stopped. 200 people sat in absolute silence, staring at proof that their community hero was actually a predator who'd built his generous reputation by stealing from the people who'd trusted him most. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing up in the back row, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence, "my name is Corinne Duval. I'm Adrian's mother. And everything you see on that screen represents what my son stole from me while I was unconscious in a hospital bed, fighting for my life." Adrian finally found his voice. "She's sick," he said desperately into the microphone. "She has dementia, she doesn't understand what she's saying, she—" "Then explain this," Imani said, clicking to the final slide. The screen showed Adrian's appointment calendar, pulled from his own computer files. Right there, scheduled for the following Thursday, was my competency evaluation. The appointment where he planned to have me declared mentally incompetent and locked away forever. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the notation he'd added to the appointment: "Final phase, eliminate primary witness." The room was dead silent. Adrian stood at the podium, his face ashen, his hands shaking as he gripped the microphone. Everything he'd built, his reputation, his community standing, his perfect image as the devoted son, was crumbling in real time in front of everyone who'd believed in him. But as he looked out at the shocked faces of his neighbors and friends, I saw something flicker across his expression that chilled me to the bone. He wasn't finished fighting. This public exposure wasn't his defeat. It was just forcing him to move to his final, most desperate plan. And suddenly I realized that humiliating Adrian in public might have been the worst mistake I could have made. Because now he had nothing left to lose. The parking lot felt like a trap. People streamed out of the community center in shocked silence, avoiding eye contact with me as they hurried to their cars. A few elderly residents approached tentatively, Mrs. Patterson's daughter, Mr. Rodriguez's nephew, others whose names I recognized from Adrian's ledger, but even their gratitude felt hollow in the face of what we'd all lost. Adrian had disappeared immediately after the presentation ended, slipping out a side door while the crowd was still processing what they'd seen. Mr. Calloway stayed close to my side as we walked toward the parking lot, his eyes scanning the shadows between the streetlights. "We should get you somewhere safe," he said quietly. "Adrian's been exposed, but cornered criminals are the most dangerous kind." I fumbled with my car keys, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline of confronting my son in front of half the town. "Where am I supposed to go? He owns my house, remember? According to the legal documents he forged, I don't have anywhere that's actually mine." That's when I saw the envelope tucked under my windshield wiper. My name was written across the front in Adrian's neat handwriting, not typed like the legal documents, but handwritten in the same script I'd seen in his childhood homework assignments. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words that made my blood freeze: "You should have stayed quiet." Mr. Calloway read the note over my shoulder and immediately pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. This is clearly a threat." But before he could dial, my phone rang. Adrian's number flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," Mr. Calloway warned. I answered it anyway. "Hello, Adrian." His voice was different again, not cold like yesterday's call, but desperate. Frantic. Like a man who'd just watched his entire world collapse in front of 200 witnesses. "You destroyed everything," he said, and for a moment he sounded like the little boy who used to cry when his toy broke. "Do you understand what you've done? My career, my reputation, my future. All gone because you couldn't just accept what was happening and disappear quietly." What was happening, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded, was theft. Fraud. Elder abuse. I wasn't going to disappear quietly so you could keep destroying families. Families. Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think this was about other families? Mother, this was only ever about you. Everything else was just practice." The words hit me like a physical blow. All those names in his ledger, all those elderly people he'd stolen from, they'd just been rehearsals for the main event. Test runs to perfect his system before he used it to erase his own mother. "Why?" I whispered. "Why did you hate me so much?" The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. "Because you were never supposed to live this long," he finally said. "Dad's life insurance was supposed to cover everything. My college, my business investments, my future. But you just kept living, and living and living, spending money that should have been mine." My heart broke completely. Not just for myself, but for the little boy I'd raised who'd grown into a man who saw his mother's life as an obstacle to his inheritance. "But now you've forced my hand," Adrian continued. "I can't use the legal system anymore. I can't rely on forged documents or fake medical evaluations. You've made this personal." "It was always personal," I said. "I'm your mother." "Not anymore," he said, and the line went dead. Mr. Calloway had been recording the call on his phone. "That's enough evidence for the police to issue an arrest warrant," he said. "Adrian just confessed to multiple felonies and implied a direct threat against you." But as we stood in the empty parking lot, I felt something I hadn't expected after finally exposing Adrian's crimes to the community. I felt sorry for him. Not sorry enough to forgive him, not sorry enough to let him continue destroying innocent families. But sorry for the bright little boy who'd somehow twisted himself into a man who could only see love as a financial burden, who could only measure relationships in terms of profit and loss. "There's something else," Mr. Calloway said, looking at his phone. "I just got a message from the prosecutor's office. They want to meet with us tomorrow morning. Between tonight's public evidence presentation and Adrian's recorded confession, they're prepared to file federal charges immediately." Federal charges meant the FBI would get involved. It meant Adrian wouldn't just lose his local reputation, he'd face decades in prison. It meant the other families he'd destroyed would finally get justice. But it also meant my son would spend the rest of his life behind bars. "Mrs. Duval," a voice called from across the parking lot. Margaret Chun was walking toward us, her face streaked with tears but her step determined. "I wanted to tell you how brave you were tonight. And I wanted to give you this." She handed me another envelope, thicker than the threatening note from Adrian. "I found these in my office files after Adrian left today. Documents he'd asked me to notarize but that I'd never processed. I think they show his next planned targets." I opened the envelope and felt my knees go weak. Inside were blank power of attorney forms for 12 more elderly people in our community. 12 more families Adrian had been planning to destroy. Some of the names I recognized: people from our church, neighbors I'd known for decades, friends who'd trusted Adrian because they'd known him since he was a child. But what made my blood run cold was the timeline written on each form. Adrian had planned to complete all 12 frauds within the next 6 months, systematically working his way through every elderly person in town who had assets worth stealing. My public confrontation hadn't just stopped him from institutionalizing me. It had saved a dozen other families from the same destruction he'd brought to mine. "We did the right thing," I said to Mr. Calloway, surprised by how strong my voice sounded. "Whatever happens next, we stopped him from hurting anyone else." But as we drove away from the community center, as the streetlights blurred past my passenger window, I couldn't shake the feeling that Adrian's final words had been more than just an angry threat. They'd sounded like a promise. And I had the terrible feeling that our very public victory tonight had only pushed him toward something much more dangerous than forged documents and fake medical evaluations. Something that wouldn't require lawyers or courts or legal systems at all. But whatever Adrian was planning next, I wasn't the same confused, isolated woman he'd been manipulating for months. I had allies now. I had evidence. I had the truth on my side. Most importantly, I had something Adrian had never expected his mother to possess: the absolute determination to fight back, no matter what it cost me. The question was whether that determination would be enough to survive whatever desperate plan he was already putting into motion. 6 months later, I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once braided Adrian's hair, but everything else had changed. The house was mine again. Legally, officially, with court documents that couldn't be forged or challenged. My bank accounts had been restored, my retirement savings returned, my name cleared of every fraudulent transaction Adrian had engineered. The pile of legal papers on my table represented not just victory, but complete vindication. But the most important document wasn't about money at all. It was a letter from Margaret Chun, now serving as the coordinator for a new elder protection program we'd started in our county. The program had already identified and stopped 3 other fraud schemes targeting elderly residents. Schemes that followed Adrian's exact blueprint from families in neighboring towns who'd learned his methods before his empire collapsed. "Dear Corinne," Margaret's letter read, "I wanted you to know that the Hartford family called today. Thanks to the warning system you helped establish, they caught their son forging their mother's signature before he could steal more than a few $100s. Mrs. Hartford said to tell you that your courage saved her life. That makes 37 families now who've been protected because you refused to stay quiet. 37 families. That number meant more to me than every dollar that had been returned to my accounts. I looked up at the framed photo on my mantel, not the old picture of Adrian at Christmas, but a new one from last month's Community Volunteer Appreciation Dinner. Me, Margaret, Mr. Calloway, Imani, and 12 other people who'd turned their own experiences with financial fraud into a network that protected other vulnerable families. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman in her 30s holding a manila folder. Mrs. Duval? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a reporter with the County Herald. I was hoping you might have a few minutes to talk about the elder protection program you founded. I'd been giving more interviews lately, not because I wanted fame, but because every story published meant more families would recognize the warning signs of financial fraud before it was too late. Sarah settled into the chair across from my kitchen table, her recorder positioned between us like a bridge connecting my story to families I'd never meet but might someday save. What I want people to understand, I said, looking directly into her earnest eyes, is that this kind of betrayal doesn't announce itself with shouting or obvious threats. It comes quietly, with paperwork that looks official and explanations that sound reasonable. It comes from people you trust completely, sometimes the people you love most. Sarah nodded, taking notes. And Adrian? How do you feel about your son now? The question I'd been dreading and expecting for months. Adrian is serving 12 years in federal prison, I said carefully. The judge said it was one of the most systematic elder fraud cases she'd ever seen. He won't be eligible for parole for 8 years. But how do you feel about him personally? I was quiet for a long moment, staring at the table where I used to help a little boy with his homework, where I used to cut sandwiches into shapes that made him laugh. I feel sad, I said finally. Not sorry for turning him in. I'd do that again in a heartbeat to protect other families. But sad that the bright, curious child I raised became a man who could only see people as opportunities for profit. Sad that somewhere along the way, I failed to teach him that love isn't a transaction. Sarah's pen stopped moving. Do you think you failed as a mother? I think I loved him the best way I knew how, I said. But I also think that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes people make choices that put them beyond the reach of love, no matter how much you want to save them. After Sarah left, I walked out to my small front garden, the one I'd almost lost along with everything else. The flowers I'd planted in the spring were blooming now, bright splashes of color against the white fence I'd repaired myself. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Duval, my name is Jennifer Walsh. My grandmother Dorothy is one of the people your son stole from. I wanted to thank you for helping us get her money back, but also for something else. Grandma said your story gave her courage to report another family member who'd been taking advantage of her. You saved her twice. I smiled, typing back, your grandmother is a strong, brave woman. Please tell her I'm proud to know her. As the sun set over my small town, the same town where Adrian had built his reputation as a generous benefactor while systematically destroying the families who trusted him, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the naive peace of someone who'd never been betrayed, but the hard-earned peace of someone who'd fought back against impossible odds and won. Not just for herself, but for everyone who came after. My story wasn't unique. Across the country, elderly parents were discovering that their children had been stealing from them, manipulating them, erasing them from their own lives. But most of them never fought back. Most of them disappeared quietly, ashamed and isolated, while their abusers moved on to new victims. I'd refused to disappear quietly. And in refusing, I'd discovered something Adrian never understood. That real strength doesn't come from controlling other people or manipulating systems or forging signatures on legal documents. Real strength comes from standing up and speaking truth, even when, especially when that truth is inconvenient for people in power. The papers on my kitchen table rustled in the evening breeze coming through the open window. Legal documents, bank statements, letters from grateful families, all evidence of a life rebuilt from ruins. But the most important evidence wasn't on paper at all. It was in my reflection in the dark window, showing a woman who'd been tested by the ultimate betrayal and had chosen to fight rather than surrender. A woman who discovered that silence isn't strength, speaking up is strength. That love without boundaries isn't really love at all. That sometimes, the bravest thing a mother can do is hold her own child accountable for the harm they cause others. Justice hadn't roared in my case. It had whispered, through forged signatures revealed under microscopes, through metadata hidden in computer files, through the quiet courage of a notary who'd chosen truth over comfortable lies. But whispers, I'd learned, can be louder than screams when they carry the weight of absolute truth. And in the end, the truth had been enough. If this story moved you, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next powerful story about love, betrayal, and the incredible strength people find when they refuse to give up. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might inspire someone else who's facing their own impossible situation. Remember, every voice matters, and every story of courage makes the world a little braver for everyone who needs to find their own strength to speak up and fight back.